I want to welcome our viewers to the April 2022 I Am Piscataway show. And stopping by for this segment, we have the acting chief of Newmarket Fire Company, Pete Nagy, and also John Iazzetta, I believe I pronounced it correctly, director of the EMS operations at JFK Hospital. Now, I've asked these two individuals to come on the show today. So a week ago today, and we're taping this, so a week ago today was we had a major fire in town, and obviously there was a lot of notoriety, not just here in our community, but from across the state of New Jersey, a lot of TV coverage, and a lot of personnel, volunteer personnel and professional staff that was on scene. So I think I probably want to start off this segment asking the acting chief, Chief Nagy, when the call went out, and for the general public, when that call went out, came from police dispatch out to the fire districts to go out. You know, you got to remember all the volunteer fires are volunteers in town, so they may be still coming home from work, maybe finishing up the tail end of their dinner, or or they're just getting off shift work or whatever. And when a call like that magnitude goes out, when it says fully involved fire, that's an all hands on deck call. When most volunteer fire companies in town, if they have not been toned out for the fire scene, when they hear that it's fully involved, that means there's a good bet that they're going to get called out. So I guess, Chief Nagy, what was your thoughts when you arrived on scene? You saw probably a plume of smoke like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, when I was actually on my way to the call, I could actually, I live off of William Street, and from William Street I could already see the smoke in the air. So I already had the ball rolling and asked dispatch to start getting me some additional resources for my company, knowing that if I could see the smoke from where I live, it's going to be
there was
bigger than
something bad going on.
So when I got there, my first thing was to see where the fire was, how big it was, and where was I going to get my water from. And then the next step I had to start thinking about, I got to make sure everybody was out of that building, because there's a lot of people that work in that plant, and I got to make sure everybody's out and all the supervisors had all their people accounted for.
Now, fortunately for you and everybody on scene, somebody had the wherewithal to pull the actual fire alarm in the building.
Absolutely. It was great.
Which initiated protocols at the PepsiCo bottling plant. It's interesting, like large companies that have, as you know, John, large companies that have large facilities like that, they do practice certain procedures and protocols for if there is an emergency or a fire, such as this case. And so somebody pulled the alarm, and that automatic triggered everybody to go to where the predetermined area is outside, that the mustering point, so to speak.
The assembly area for evacuation, usually. And Piscataway Police Department did an awesome job working with me, because they were coordinating that effort to make sure everybody, communicating with me, having their patrol officers check with their supervisors for me while I was in the back, trying to get our apparatus and our manpower set up for extinguishment of the fire.
So that's a very good point, Chief, and to bring that into perspective, because you're arriving on scene, there's equipment coming from all areas at this point from the town, and you don't know how many people are still in the building, so you're relying to a certain extent on whoever the officers that are arriving on scene to help figure out the accountability from the company, from the supervisor that's on duty.
100%. I have to rely on all the resources around me, all the help I can get. I try to get all the information I can all at once, because honestly, it's really like trying to organize chaos.
Yeah. And I think for the general public, you got to realize, like, when, even though there's right to know laws about where they have to file what type of products they may have, or so when the volunteer firefighters go in, or paid professional go in, they actually know what they potentially are up against. And in your case, when you arrived on scene, as a lot of people heard throughout the community, they heard some popping explosions that if you would have thought that, maybe it was a large dump truck backing up and banging in the back of their gate that you hear, but when you hear it 5 to 6 miles away, that's not a dump truck.
It wasn't small.
So, we could kid about it now, but from a perspective from a chief and a volunteer firefighter, when you hear something like that going off and you're coming on scene, what's going through your mind?
Honestly, the first thing was the safety of my guys.
Yeah.
Initially, that started happening when my first apparatus arrived, and I actually had to stop them from going around to the rear of the building because I either had to, one, mitigate that propane issue, or two, wait for it to all subside and then go.
Yeah, and this thing, there was some propane. There was also compressed air gas in there, and then I guess the tanks that fill the forklifts.
Correct.
So there was a combination of things, moving parts there. Then you had trucks, delivery trucks that were nearby and
directly across from the fire.
You have potential, maybe the diesel going up, even though diesel doesn't take that much to, it's not like gasoline, but still in all, you got a hot fire like that was going there. So when you pulled on scene, you're assessing the site. You're going through your mind, I want to make sure our folks are going to stay safe while they're fighting the fire. What was also going through your mind is saying, all right, what assets do I need?
Based on the volume of fire, what I try to determine was how am I going to attack the fire? Do I need ladder trucks? Do I need more engines than ladder trucks? And how far am I getting my water resources from? How far are the water mains away from the fire where the fire hydrants are? We were somewhat lucky. We had some hydrants within the complex in Pepsi. Eventually, those didn't work out so well because once we lost power to the building, the pumps that provide pressure to those hydrants didn't work anymore. But
that you may want to tell that's a standard procedure. Like when you ask to have the power cut so you fight the fire, PSC&G will come out
and cut the power.
And cut the power, which you don't want to be with live wires with water going on it while you're there. That's not a good recipe there.
Safety issue.
So, but I still get it how it was a choreographed situation because from a layperson's perspective, even though I'm public safety director, you're watching Chief Nagy in a corner of the property there, directing traffic, asking for whatever's asset. And then at that point, county OEM and municipal OEM showed up. Fortunately for Gallagher, who's Mr. Gallagher, who's the county OEM, he lives nearby in South Plainfield. So he knew automatically that there was going to be a major problem. So he automatically went directly to the site. So he was able to, along with his personnel, able to start helping bring additional assets from around the county.
Yep. Once we get past a certain level of scene size, we rely heavily on our county fire coordinators to get us resources that we need to complete the task at hand. And some of that is because we don't want to pull too much from one area, one town, because all the towns around us, they still need to protect themselves as well.
And that's a very good point for the viewership. So when this large fire was underway in our community, there was other assets coming in, maybe not necessarily to the scene, but was to backfill our town to make sure that we had coverage, given the fact that 90% of our volunteers were at the scene. So, and that's common practice for mutual aid, no matter what town it's in.
I mean, I can't. At one point, we had I know Colonia had a ladder truck in our town protecting our residents. Metuchen Fire Department. We had an engine from Middlesex that was helping us out. We had Highland Park was over in District 2 helping us out, cover the town, because most of our assets were being provided to me at Pepsi.
Yeah.
So,
well, the whole thought process is that the way county and local OEM, you want to use all your municipal assets first before you start asking for help outside of the community. So you have all this apparatus coming here, and then I'm going to get to John Iazzetta in a few minutes. There's a raging fire going on in the outside. All those pallets were cooking pretty good. It actually reminded me of, believe it or not, going back in the early 70s when the high school, when they used to have the big bonfires up on Green Acres.
Oh, yeah.
That was the size of the fire cooking. I mean, obviously, those days it was predetermined. You had a lot of fire trucks there to make sure it didn't get out of control. But with all the hose lines going back and forth, there was a problem for you, I guess, at one point, getting the equipment close enough to actually fight the fire on an angle.
Right. Well, the issue we were having was there was only one way in and one way out to the fire.
Yeah.
There was another gate, but we just didn't have access to it at that time. So we had to kind of coordinate and have the apparatus dance around and move around depending on how far we were progressing. Once we got to the fire, once we put the fire out at a certain point, we could reposition our apparatus and move them into better positions to put more of the fire out and more of the fire out.
And for those folks in the general public, you're not going to be driving over a 5-inch line that's fully charged. It just doesn't happen in the real world. No. Unless you have a ramp to go.
Right. We have those.
No, I don't. We had to use that. So, but it's just, that's why when there's a fully involved fire, as the chief knows, is that you're dropping hose all over the place, figuring out where the hydrants are, or the hydrants that are tied into the building. But in your case, is what you said, once the power, that you cut the pumps to fight the fire.
Right, and the biggest thing for me was I got to get water on the fire as fast as I can. I mean, I gave my captain from Engine 3 an impossible task to try to darken down that fire as quickly as possible so we can reposition and protect the roof as much as we can, because that was our biggest concern was the roof catching fire.
Yeah, and you didn't obviously want the membrane, because once the membrane
starts burning, it burns.
It'll just go along there. So while you're fighting the fire, you might want to explain to the general public what's it like in a turnout gear in a very hot fire like that. I know, we all know it wasn't a hot day, but with that being said, still and all, it could get very hot in a turnout gear.
It gets very hot very quickly. You're adding another 50 to 60 pounds on your back on top of your body weight. So, you're talking about gear that keeps your body heat in. So you end up sweating profusely. So you have to constantly hydrate and drink water Gear nowadays in 2022 is actually somewhat athletic cut now, believe it or not. So you actually can move around pretty decently in it now, and it breathes. But it's certainly not like wearing, a sweatsuit to the gym.
Yeah. So I want to, now that you brought about sweating and, you got to stay hydrated, and this is where I'm going to bring John Iazzetta into the discussion. At that point, you have well over 100 volunteers and fire personnel throughout the central New Jersey. When does the protocol go out for EMS to help rehab?
In our specific situation, once we strike our second alarm, we automatically request a rehab unit for the men on scene. Once they go through a bottle of air on their back, where they've been working for a period of time, we generally start moving crews through rehab, getting them a medical assessment, getting their blood pressure taken, keeping an eye on all their vitals, seeing where they're at, making sure they're okay, getting them water, getting them Gatorade. Okay,
so now, John, this is where you're going to come in. Your group gets toned out. They also toned out a larger facility bus specifically geared towards that rehabbing. That's county owned. When you come on scene, or your professional staff, what is their role on scene to assist the fire?
Sure. EMS's role in a fire is obviously secondary to the fire department, because putting out the fire and rescuing the people from the fire is absolutely the primary requirement at a scene like that. EMS is often called in alongside the fire department, but typically while they're doing their initial search and then determining if anyone needs assistance immediately, we would obviously immediately go to assess and treat those patients. And then, as Chief Nagy said, after the initial search is done and they go to the second alarm and the need for rehabilitation is established, essentially an EMS branch is set up within the command structure of a fire. And North Stelton's rehab unit and JFK EMS were able to establish a rehab site for the firefighters. And through all of the science, Chief Nagy downplayed it a little bit, but the fire department, whether it's professional or volunteer, a lot of what they're doing is based very heavily in science and research that's gone on in the fire sciences for years and years. And rehabilitation is something that a lot of focus is placed on it because it's extremely dangerous for a firefighter, not only in the fire, but immediately afterwards because their body is going through so much stress as they're initially fighting the fire with all of that equipment. Your heart rate is always elevated, your blood pressure is elevated, and when it gets beyond certain thresholds, it can become dangerous for the firefighter. Again, we're not talking about the actual flames or a collapse of a building. We're talking about as they're coming out of the fire, they need to be assessed. They need to be cooled off if they're hot. They need to be warmed up if they're cool. They need to be hydrated. So that's essentially important.
And I think that's what was one of the problems with one of the volunteers, that they weren't hydrated, and so they had to be taken to Robert Wood just to be on the safe side.
Yep, absolutely. And any sort of large scene where you have so many firefighters fighting the fire for a prolonged period of time, under that stress, they come into rehab. The rehab personnel from EMS is assessing the firefighter's vital signs. And one of the firefighters that was fighting the fire after being in for a period of time, when he came out, his blood pressure and heart rate was elevated significantly to the point where essentially the personnel that's assessing them is letting the fire department know, letting leadership within the fire department know that we believe that this firefighter would be well served to be brought to the hospital so that his vitals can be monitored continuously and he can be rehydrated appropriately with medical staff overseeing him.
Okay, so when you're talking about that, you got to remember there's lay people out in the general public here that may not know. What type of equipment do you have on scene? Obviously, especially in a case like this, you had a lot of equipment assets there as well as personnel. So just give an idea to the general public, like what's on scene. I mean, I know they all saw pictures of the fire and stuff, but they didn't see the choreographed dance that was going behind the scene with personnel.
And choreographed dance is a great way to describe it, in that there is so many moving pieces that are not necessarily visible when you're watching, a news clip or something along those lines. But just like with the fire science, where they have multiple different departments that can be leveraged to come in to help with a large fire, EMS is similar in that there are assets that are staged throughout the county and different towns that can be brought to bear for large scenes. One of them is a medical ambulance bus, which was brought in for this scene specifically initially if there's a lot of patients. So if there was a scenario where there was a fire and there was a lot of employees inside the Pepsi plant that were unable to get out, there could be a lot of patients at the same time. That medical ambulance bus can transport many patients with many providers alongside. It's a full-size school bus, but it's set up with stretchers and cardiac monitoring devices and all of the equipment that's inside of an ambulance to help treat the patients on the way to the hospital. So a medical ambulance bus is brought in to help. The rehab unit from North Stoughton was brought in to provide a lot of the rehab services and the team to do the rehab. And then we also brought in additional ambulances just to be on site.
So I want to go back to this. So the rehab, so was it refilling the oxygen, and also I know there was another truck there refilling the oxygen.
The Scott bottles?
Scott bottles.
Oh yeah, the Holmes Marshall.
Okay. So that's separate from what you were talking about, the rehabbing.
Correct. That's more refilling the Scott packs so that the firefighter can put on a Scott pack and go back into the fire. The rehabilitation is where they're coming out of the fire. They're going to a designated area. They're having their vitals checked. They're getting rehydrated. And
forcing them to drink some fluids.
Yes,
correct.
Absolutely, because it is essentially important. They may not even realize how much they're
So the ironic part was the general manager that was on duty, I guess went and got a forklift full pallet of Gatorade that they had.
He did. I did thank him for it.
Yeah, that they had, and just, because normally the fire companies rely on either the auxiliaries or one of the squads to, have the fluids out there. But in this case, you're fighting a fire at a bottling plant that has access, so they just took it off the back of a truck and dropped it right there.
Yep.
So that doesn't happen too often.
No, that was very convenient.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to get a chuckle when when you have things going in your eye, and it's like, wow, this is pretty good that this happened. But with that being said, I mean, is there a standard how much fluid per needs to be drank in a thing like?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a standard of how much fluid needs to be drank. A lot of it is predicated on the patient or the firefighter's vital signs, and if their heart rate's elevated. Why is it elevated and what can we do to correct it? If their blood pressure is high or low, what can we do to correct it? So a lot of it is based very much on the actual patient or firefighter in front of you.
Okay, so your folks arrive on scene. You're supporting Chief Nagy and the rest of the firefighters out there. We're now an hour into the fire, maybe an hour and a half into the fire. What was going on in your thoughts? Did you think you ever get it out?
I was prepared for a long night.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, at that point, we had probably darkened down the fire quite a bit, and we were working on repositioning our ladder trucks, specifically North Stelton's ladder truck, to get it up closer to the fire so that we had a better shot at putting it out altogether. And we were actively working on getting that back gate open as well, so that we can get an additional apparatus.
Well, once the back gate was open off of Lakeview Avenue, that changed the whole dynamics.
100%.
So, which allowed for another line to be tapped to come in.
From New Brunswick Avenue.
So you might want to talk about, you're pouring water in several different points on the facility now. Yet you still didn't have enough pressure because the sprinkler system, the fire suppression system, was going in the building.
Correct. So one of our supply lines was a yard hydrant, which is the same water system that supplies the sprinkler system inside the building. So the fire had gotten to the point where the heat had built up so much in the roof of the building, not necessarily fire, but heat. It actually set off the sprinkler system inside the building.
It did what it was supposed to do.
It did what it was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for us, when that happens, now that water system also has to feed all those sprinklers, so now we lose pressure from the hydrant, which is also feeding the sprinklers.
So, so then you're looking for a different water source of water, and this doesn't happen too often. You started drafting water from Newmarket Pond.
Correct. In Middlesex County, we have a strike team, and it's called the LDH strike team, which is large diameter hose strike team. And what their job is to relocate water from one area and bring it to where you need it at the fire, whether it be a mile away, 2 miles away, 3 miles away. They can bring it from wherever you need it. Now, just so happened, again, we got lucky. Newmarket Pond is basically just about right across the street. So we actually pulled water from Newmarket Pond, and at the end of that fire, Newmarket Pond actually put out the Pepsi fire.
Well, the ironic part was we had the gate open, John, to lower the dam, the water level, because we have to do the 5-year annual inspection on the dam integrity. And we still haven't been able to do it yet because it keeps raining each time. And But it actually did DVW a little favor there to lower the lake a little bit.
We took a few thousand gallons out of it, for sure.
But I mean, I know that's the strike team going out there, but I guess people, like, if somebody from the general public said, well, if they're drawing water or siphoning the water from the pond, aren't they worried about debris and things like that going into the apparatus? Well, so kind of, I don't want to get too specific, but maybe you could just, for general purposes, what people would.
So the 6-inch, there are 6-inch wide suction tubes that go into the water. On the ends of those are screens. So nothing can come through those screens, nothing significant. Nothing, no rocks, no debris, no cans, no fish, no turtles are coming up through that screen.
I'd like to see it put the fire out with some fish flying in there. Yeah. But I mean, because most people would say, if I'm a layperson, say, well, obviously there wasn't enough pressure and stuff like that. But I mean, that building was built in the late 80s. Obviously, fire suppression systems regulations have changed substantially when new technology has come out. Probably there's now required much bigger lines and separate suppression systems that's not going to take away from, fighting the fire system, so to speak.
And the problem, quite honestly, the problem is the suppression system never became a factor for us because in a lot of ways, the fire was never really totally inside the building.
Yeah.
Everything was on the outside and then above the suppression system on the roof. So the suppression system couldn't even help us. And that's where there's a great safety system in place, but it just couldn't help what we were dealing with.
Yeah. So, you know, when everybody talks about solar panels and things like that, one of the drawbacks for having large solar fields on large building roofs like this is that even though PSE&G comes and cuts the power, there's actually power still being generated by the solar panels.
That's correct. They're always charged.
And what type of dynamic does that present to you and other folks when you have to fight a fire in this situation?
Well, it hinders anything that you have to get done on top of the roof. If you have to cut holes in the roof for ventilation. At one point, we had discussed to stop the membrane from burning that night. We had talked about sending crews to the roof to actually cut the membrane, and so that way it would stop. It had nowhere. It would just stop the burning because now it's not connected anymore to the rest of the membrane. But the problem was because of the solar panel farm that was on the rooftop, it was going to make it way too cumbersome and way too long, and it wouldn't be effective. Yeah.
So in other words, you just repositioned the ladder tower trucks to get different angles.
Correct. Even though it took a little bit longer, we felt it took maybe a little bit longer to reposition the ladder trucks. It actually was going to be a lot more easier to get to where we needed to get to.
All right. So it's around 10 o'clock at night, and we're going to get to this. So, John, Director Iazzetta, from your professional, what is your organization doing? You know, you're at a major scene. You're doing rehab for the fire. Are you in contact with the hospitals saying, hey, there's a potential for a lot of patients coming your way?
Sure. So anytime we have a large scene in our area, we'll send out a notification to our on-duty supervisors as well. So in this area, we have an on-duty supervisor 24/7 in an SUV that can respond to scenes to assist. And once we realized the size and the scope of this fire, we sent our on-duty field supervisor to the command post. So Chief Nagy can explain that essentially any large fire, you're going to set up a command post, and there's representatives from different agencies that are brought to bear at that command post so that the lines of communication are always open and that answers can be had and can found quickly and then disseminated amongst the group of leaders. So we sent our on-duty field supervisor to the command post, and he spent the vast majority of the fire there basically listening and observing for any sort of needs on the EMS side so that he could relay back to our communications center if we needed additional ambulances brought in, if we needed to find a second medical ambulance bus, additional rehab units. And while that is occurring, we're still also monitoring the scene that's going on to see if there's any other resources that maybe we can help with.
Now, Director Iazzetta just brought up a very good point, and I know Chief Nagy knows this. A lot of times, by just standing there at the command post, you're hearing all the information that's coming in from all the assets over the radio or coming up to the command truck. And you might not necessarily have to ask a question of the chief. Yep. You've heard it verbatim from you, so you're not bothering the chief or who's in charge of the command. You've already deduced that, hey, I'm going to need this asset or additional personnel power. You're just going to tell the chief, hey, look, I'm going to call up X, Y, and Z, let the county know so they can help assist in acquiring whatever additional assets or personnel power up to the scene or on standby. Because just by the fact that standing next to the command vehicle, you're gathering intel on what's going on in real time.
Absolutely. The incident commander is the busiest person at the scene. They're managing all of the resources that are being brought to bear. They're making sure that everybody is safe. They obviously have a bunch of staff that they'll establish that can help with that, but that incident commander is extremely busy. So to stop the incident commander from doing what he's doing, to ask a routine question, or do you need this or do you need that, it takes time. And it adds a whole layer of complexity to the problem. So being at the command post, just hearing those things and getting the information that you need back to the chief quickly definitely cuts down on the amount of administrative time that's required when you're dealing with a true emergency.
So, Chief Nagy, so you're there, and I'm trying to give the folks a flavor of what goes on in a major situation like this. There's a lot of people asking you for different assets, and at the same time, there's a lot of talk over the radio system of the channel of the fire personnel inside the building or on the exterior fighting the fire, giving you real-time information or what they need. But then again, you have all these people converging on you because you're in charge of the scene. Again, so you're doing a delicate, you're sort of like a ringmaster in there trying to figure out where all the pieces of the puzzle are going to fit in order to fight the fire.
Absolutely. You know, it gets very crazy. It gets hectic. You're talking about stress and adrenaline level through the roof. Everybody's trying to pull you in 100 different directions. I need this, I need that, I need this, I need that. And the only thing I can do is give my operations officer everything he needs to succeed and just keep bringing in the assets he needs, trying to help everybody one at a time. Sometimes, you know, it's not fast enough. Sometimes it is fast enough. I just have to kind of prioritize the pecking order and just keep going, keep going, and keep going.
Now, so you have a lot of personnel there from all over central New Jersey on this one. You have accountability officers. Now, what is their role on the scene?
So accountability is the number one safety thing on a scene. You always want to make sure that whatever guys you bring to the scene, you want to make sure they come home with you. You never want to lose anybody. So we need to track how many personnel we have on scene. So in the fire service, we are issued ID tags. Every firefighter carries 2 ID tags. One ID tag gets attached to a board in the apparatus and gets turned into command. So I know everybody who came in on Middlesex's engine. I know everybody who came in on North Stelton's engine. I see all their crew members. The other tag they keep with them, and that tag is used for when they enter a structure. So if Pepsi, so if they enter a structure, they have to tag out and take their other tag off, and it's supposed to be given to an accountability officer or a safety officer so that we know, God forbid, something happens while they're inside that structure. We have a catastrophic failure of the roof. Oh my God, who was in there? How do we know? Well, I got 4 tags here. We got to find these 4 guys. We got to know where these 4 guys are. And that's what it is. That's an assurance for us in the command position that I came here with 100 men. I'm walking out of here with 100 men. And I just want to make sure everybody comes home at the end of the day.
And I can't reemphasize enough for the viewership because when you have a very large scene like this, it's very easy to overlook something. And that's why you have a system set up, and it's not just there, it's all over the state that they set that up that way.
Yeah, this is a standard now.
Standard. All right, so we're at 10:30 at night. You finally determined you believe you have the fire under control. What was the next process in that?
Well, at this point, I actually had spoken with our township OEM coordinator, Paul Snyder, and you know, we already had some apparatus that were getting low on fuel. So the township was able to support us and get us a couple fuel trucks to get some of our apparatus, a few extra gallons of fuel they needed to finish the fire. We also made a request. Our DPW provided us a backhoe, which we desperately needed to be able to sift through the rubble of all those pallets. You can imagine when you cook at home in a barbecue and you have the pile of charcoal on the bottom. Well, we had a huge mound of charcoal from all the pallets that were burning. So we had to be able to sift through all that and get all that all the hot coals underneath
all turned
up and turned over and get water on them. At that point, it just became kind of like mop up. I call it mop up duty. We're checking the building, making sure nothing else is on fire, checking the air quality in the building, make sure it's safe for people to go inside and start doing their inspections and so forth and so on.
So there was, so John, in between you and the chief, you know, there was obviously some people called. They were concerned about the air quality from the fire, which is a legitimate concern.
Sure.
But county hazmat was on scene too.
Our county hazmat was on scene, and they were monitoring the air quality constantly. It was,
With the special equipment
with their
they
equipment, and everything was good. There was nothing to be concerned with. I can assure you that if there was an issue with air quality, we would have put the word out for everybody to the nearby area. If they needed to evacuate or leave, we would have gotten that word out.
Yeah, no, that's that's one of the problems. The last thing you were fighting a fire if there's poor air quality. It wasn't like a petrochemical plant going up in Texas where you have to evacuate half the town.
Right.
All right, so you finally get that. So then everything's outside. So you have infrared cameras.
Correct. We had to deploy a multitude of what we call with thermal. We call them TICs. They're thermal imaging cameras, and they basically show us what's hot, what's not, what we need to still put a little bit more water on to get it cooled down to a safe temperature. So we were inside checking a lot of the roof lines where the fire was. We had some areas that were up against the wall where the fire was, some pallets of paper that had gotten hot and were smoldering. So we were kind of pulling those pallets apart and dousing them with water, checking them with the thermal imaging cameras, making sure they're cooled down to an acceptable level before we departed there.
So for the general public, why do you use an imaging camera?
It's really the only way you're going to know what's fire and what's not fire. I mean, you could touch something and say, oh yeah, that's warm, but how do you know? It actually will tell you what temperature range you're working in.
The last thing you want to do is after you roll up all the hose back up and put it back on a truck, it's having to come back out.
You never want to come back out.
Yeah. So, Director Iazzetta, so at the tail end, when do you get a green light to go home?
Typically, after the vast majority of the firefighters have been cleared from the scene. Anytime we have a large number of firefighters, even after everybody's already been assessed and they're not, actively fighting fire, they're in that mop-up stage, as Chief Nagy explained, we're still going to be there for a period of time when the heavy work is going on to provide those rehabilitation services if they're needed. Once rehab is no longer needed, that's when we can most likely start packing up and heading off.
So, all right, so you do once the rehab is packed up, so the actual Red Cross actually showed up.
I did. They offered their services and I accepted, only because I didn't know how long this operation could have lasted for over a day, depending on how smoothly everything went. So I always try to stay 2 or 3 steps ahead of where my operation is and consider, well, if this happens, what would I need? Well, I may need an area where guys can get some food, some drink in them, where they can sit, where they can relax for a while and go in and start another work period. Because at some point, you only have so much energy, and you're going to need to start getting some calories back into your body so you can burn more.
And as I said when we started this segment here about, it was during dinner hours. Some people might have not eaten on the way to the fire scene. But fortunately for Piscataway Township, we have an agreement with the Red Cross where they stationed some of their assets here at Town Hall in case there's an event, not just in Piscataway, but in the general Central New Jersey area. So everything gets called up. So somebody asked me, why was the New Jersey Fire Service here? Okay,
so where the fire was, right next to the fire, there's a field. There's a set of woods in a field, and then you have the Aspen apartment and townhouse complex. So when the propane started exploding, a lot of the propane tanks, the pieces of them, were actually shooting off into the woods next door. And then you also had the radiant heat from the massive fire that was on the outside of that building.
Where the ambers were...
They were just landing in the woods. The woods actually, a brush fire had started. And it started small, but then it grew to about 50, 60, 70 feet, and it kept growing. So we decided to have State Forest Fire Service come in and take care of that because I couldn't afford to lose
on
any
the
more resources putting the building fire out to to put the fire in the woods out. But I knew we needed to get that fire put out in the woods because if it kept burning and burning, it could affect the complex, the neighbors next door in the Aspen complex.
The ironic part was a fire alert, wind alert was with the weather meteorologists had that day because it was windy and it was very dry conditions. So,
Perfect storm.
I mean, in your time that you've been involved as a volunteer, have you guys ever had to call the Forest Service? Or?
I have for other reasons, and it's more accessibility issues, not because there was a large fire. I have never called them in a situation like that. That was the first time for me. But more times than not, if we do call, we have our own brush trucks that we use. We have units in town as well as surrounding towns. A lot of times, if we can't access something, a lot of times they have the ability to, because they have these trucks with giant cages on them, and they can almost just run some smaller trees over with them and so forth. So they sometimes have better access to areas that we can't get to.
Yeah. So Director Iazzetta, in the EMS world, after a very large event like this, and this is a real-time, this wasn't just a tabletop exercise, a live event. What does the professional staff do after they've come from an event like this, say a week or two later? Talk about like what could have been done better?
Sure, yeah.
Or what we did right? Or
Right. And I'd say it's similar for volunteer organizations as well. Part of learning from every scene that we're going to involves, as you said, tabletop exercises, full-scale drills, training. All of that really needs to happen because the science is constantly changing. What the firefighters and EMS personnel is encountering is constantly changing. So it's never good to have a large scene like this, but when you do have a large scene from this, you have the opportunity to learn. And not only Newmarket and JFK EMS, but all of the other departments that participated also have a great opportunity to play Monday morning quarterback, to look at the scene and say, what went right, what went a little bit wrong or could have gone better next time, and learn from that collective experience and then disseminate that to the rest of the industry and the rest of our neighbors so that everybody gets a little bit better. Scenes like this don't happen every day.
No,
but when
that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a great thing. But because of the camaraderie of emergency services personnel and fire department and EMS and police and OEMs, the education that we all gain from large scenes that happen, throughout the state or even throughout the country, help to provide additional safety and security and better ways to treat and fight fire and treat injuries come through that education. So
I know the County Fire Training School down in Sayreville. I know this fire scene obviously is probably going to be talked about because it just happened. But from your viewpoint, Chief Nagy, I mean, where do you see this going to go as a training exercise? I know one of the things that was talked about is that when they let the employees go home from PepsiCo, the keys were locked up for the trucks that they wanted to get moved, so you could have had your better positioning right there. And little small things like that.
And to follow up on his point, we do what we have a debriefing, which I'm actually holding tomorrow evening. And I've invited all the township fire departments and our county hazmat too. So we can go over these things and all the little things that we could do better next time, not to nitpick on people or anything or any kind of decision that was made, but to learn from it. Because there's definitely value in that, and that's what's going to make us a better department down the road and in the future.
Well, this is a lot better than a virtual simulator, so to speak.
Right.
Where you actually had to. So, and actually, it's a learning lesson for the private sector for facilities such as this. Like, that, hey, listen, you got to, even though the plant manager was there and available at the command post because he knows the building, but who would have thought with the trucks, with the keys to be able to move the trucks?
Well, we got lucky there because one of my firefighters is actually an employee of Pepsi.
Yeah.
So he was actually the one who we tasked to, without fail, you got to get this done.
Yeah.
And he got it done. So.
Yeah, but that we were lucky in that situation.
But what if we weren't lucky?
But that this was a learning exercise,
right.
so to speak, that in the future we got to have coordination, talking with the facility managers on why that's critical. Well, any last minute comments?
I just want to thank the 20 departments, the 160 men and women that were out there working with us, all of our EMS agencies that came out and supported us, Township OEM, Middlesex County Fire Coordinators, the Middlesex County Fire Marshal's Office. I had state UASI coordinators there. The Piscataway DPW, Piscataway Police, the Mayor's Office for getting us what we needed through those resources. Just was a tremendous amount of support shown to us, and it was just great to know that when we have an event like that, that people are going to come out and help.
Director Iazzetta, do you through the EMS lens, do you have any last minute comments?
No, I would say that we were very pleasantly surprised. As you know, we're relatively new to Piscataway Township. We've been here since September as the EMS provider for the town. And this was our first really large scene in Piscataway. And literally, while the scene was going on, from our supervisor on scene, we were getting reports about how well everything was going at the scene. And it's a testament to the resources that everybody here has in Piscataway, whether it's a local resource, and there are a lot of local resources, which is great, or the surrounding neighborhoods around Piscataway. Everybody in Piscataway should know that it's extremely safe, and it's nice to know that all of these resources are available when needed. You may never see them, but when it's needed, they all come out.
And that's a very good, valid point. And for the viewership out there, we want to remind it now that these folks are on center stage fighting the fire and choreographing the behind the scenes. Now the real hard work is the investigation of how this fire started, to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. And then the recovery of actually renovating the facility, because there's a lot of jobs involved at that site. So, and some of the township employees are employed there. So, or I should say township residents. But, we don't want to see that happening in other facilities, not just in Piscataway, but any other community in Middlesex County. So, but on behalf of myself and the township governing body, council members, I want to thank everybody who was out there. I know I've already done it publicly, but I'll say it again. It was for me personally, it was a very proud moment to watch all these different entities all working a very scripted dance out there. And it turned out well enough that nobody was hurt. And there was no loss of life, and to me, that is the best thing that happened out of that situation.
Absolutely.
So with that, I want to thank Newmarket Fire Acting Chief Pete Nagy for stopping by I Am Piscataway, and John Iazzetta, the Director of EMS Services at JFK Hospital, for thanking pinch hitting today to come on the show. One day in class, Duncan went to take out his crayons and found a stack of letters with his name on them. To Duncan. All right, listen, I love that I am your favorite crayon for grapes, dragons, and wizards hats. But it makes me crazy that so much of my gorgeous color goes outside of the lines. If you don't start coloring inside the lines soon, I'm going to completely lose it. Your very neat friend, Purple Crayon.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It is my honor to welcome you all to the Piscataway Recreation Middle School Basketball Championship Finals, being played for the first time in the relatively still new Piscataway Community Center. My name is John Kearney. I am the Director of the Department of Recreation, and it is great to see everybody out here after missing out last year when we couldn't have the program.
This is Piscataway's version of the NCAA championship game, and it really gives me an honor to see that these teams are going to be the first teams to play the first officiated game here in this beautiful facility here.
That's a good finish.
I'll tell you, I am so Justin Williams. Good play, good play. Justin Williams.
Oh! Look at the attitude! Come on!
What a block! On the boards there, I tell you. Great pass.
That'll do it for our 5th and 6th grade season. The Heat, the 2 seed, go to 14-3 overall on the season. They bring home the championship. And let's also say, what a great season for the Tar Heels.
Yes, yeah.
Trey Barksdale, smooth little floater. Off.
Oh, what a shot there. Johan Stevenson. Look by Johan.
Number 18, Kendall Tillman, count the basket. Maybe Inchia, let it go. There it is.
What a shot.
Quite a while. He might be a little banged up.
Yeah.
So I would be really focusing.
Man, I tell you, I like David. He's picking and choosing his spots.
Yeah.
Recreation department do a super job. Another successful year. And it's been great working with
Thank you,
sir.
Coach. As always,
Absolutely.
I look forward to seeing you next year.
Yes.
Parents at home, if you have a 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th or 8th grader next year, sign them up. Get them out here. Let's play ball.
Absolutely.
All right.
So we'll see you soon the next time on the I Am Piscataway. Well, welcome back, Easter Bunny. Thanks for stopping by.